Hello and welcome to episode 13 of The Terror Cellar. I'm Andy Crofts and I have a couple of creepy stories just for your delight, and without further ado, I'm just going to get straight into it. So, you know what to do. Sit down, dim the lights, put on your headphones, close your eyes and get ready for episode number 1, The Underground Phantom. Back in the 1970s, I worked as a station attendant in the London Underground. It was a busy, fast-paced job with thousands of people passing through the tunnels and platforms every day. Most of my shifts were in the evenings, and I was often the last person to lock up. When the day's chaos gave way to silence, the vast, winding tunnels took on an eerie quality, especially in stations like Covent Garden, where I had one experience I'll never forget. It had been a hectic day, and by the time I was making my final rounds, the station felt unnaturally still. The hum of activity had faded, leaving only the distant echoes of my footsteps. I descended to the platform, flashlight in hand, picking up bits of rubbish left behind by the day's commuters. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the platform, partially cloaked in the shadow, stood a tall man. He was dressed in a long black coat, wearing what appeared to be a top hat, with a cane in one hand. He stood motionless near the edge of the platform, facing the advertisement-covered wall, seemingly oblivious to my presence. I froze for a moment, startled by the sight. Passengers were supposed to be long gone by now. Regaining my composure, I called out, "Excuse me, sir, the station is closed." My voice echoed through the tunnel, but he didn't respond or even flinch. Grabbing my flashlight tighter, I hurried towards him. The empty platform made the distance feel impossibly long. The sound of my boots on the tiles unnervingly loud. As I closed the gap, I noticed something off about him. His posture was too rigid, his clothing far too outdated, as if he'd stepped out of a Victorian photograph. About halfway there, I lost my grip on the flashlight. It clattered to the ground and rolled dangerously close to the tracks. Swearing under my breath, I crouched to grab it. By the time I stood back up and flickered the beam ahead, the man was gone. I scanned the platform in every direction, my pulse racing. He couldn't have disappeared so quickly, not in that heavy coat, not without a sound. Determined to find him, I ventured into the labyrinth of tunnels, my footsteps growing quicker and more frantic. Up staircases, down winding corridors, through dimly lit passages, I searched everywhere. But it was as if he had vanished into thin air. After an hour of searching, I finally gave up and headed home, uneasy and shaken. The next day, I mentioned the encounter to a few co-workers, expecting scepticism or a laugh. Instead, their faces turned grim. "Oh, you saw him?" one said knowingly. "Who?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "The man in the top hat," another replied. "It's a common sighting in Covent Garden. Supposedly it's the ghost of an old actor. He's been seen here for decades, always dressed in black, and always on the platform or disappearing into tunnels." They went on to share similar stories. Other workers seeing the same tall, spectral figure late at night, only for him to vanish before their eyes. I never saw him again during my time on the Underground, but I was left with the unsettling knowledge that something or someone still lingered in those dark, empty tunnels. Thank you, Peter Small, for your story. I have to say, I have heard about this before. It's quite a common story, and I did a bit of Googling to see if there's any more about it. And there's quite a bit of information on the internet. I mean, it's a lot too much for me to go into now. But yeah, it's quite a common story for Covent Garden, and Apparently it is the ghost of an old actor of some sort. You know, maybe he's walking the station, walking the platforms on his way to his final audition or final performance, who knows. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested, definitely get on the internet and have a little look about that. It's quite a fascinating little story. Now, for story number 2, Paper Moon. This story takes me back to the age of 18. I'm 41 now, but even after all these years, the memory is etched in my mind as if it happened yesterday. Back then, I was on a high. I'd recently passed my driving test, and the thrill of newfound freedom was intoxicating. My first car had become my sanctuary, a second home, and apart from sleeping, I spent most of the time behind the wheel, cruising wherever the roads would take me. Having the car also meant I was rarely alone. My friends were always with me, turning every evening into a spontaneous adventure. We'd drive for hours, often late into the night, chasing laughs and creating memories. At the time, though, there was a bittersweet undercurrent in my life. I'd recently lost my grandfather, the man who had been more than just family to me. He was my rock, my protector, the father figure I never had. From as far back as I can remember, I was his little Ruby. We were inseparable. He gave me a sense of safety and a love that was unmatched. One thing I'll never forget about him was the way he'd sing Ella Fitzgerald's song, Paper Moon. It was his song, and whenever he sang it in his endearingly scratchy voice, I'd twirl around like a carefree child. That song became a thread, tying me to him, even after he passed. On the day of this experience, I woke up with a strange knot in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't nerves exactly, but it was unsettling, like an unspoken warning. My friends and I had planned a weekend trip, driving out in the evening to stay at a hotel overnight. We wanted to wake up ready to explore without wasting daylight. By 6 p.m, with the car packed and my friends ready, I still couldn't shake off that uneasy feeling. But I ignored it. I didn't want to ruin the trip before it even began. The first leg of the journey was full of laughter and joy. We belted out Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer and Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody as the miles disappeared behind us. A few hours into the drive, we decided to stop at a service station, a last chance to refuel and grab snacks and stretch our legs before hitting the dark, desolate country roads ahead. I parked the car, locked it, and, as always, slipped the keys into my bag. After some food and chatting, we headed back. That's when the night took a turn. I pulled my keys out, unlocked the door, and we all got in. A moment later, I realised something was wrong. My keys, the ones I'd just used, were gone. At first, I thought I was being scatterbrained. I tore through my bag, then the seats, and eventually the entire car, but the keys were nowhere. My friends joined in, checked every nook and cranny, even underneath the car, but nothing. At least an hour passed. Frustration turned into confusion, and confusion turned into unease. How could they vanish like that? Then, in the distance, we heard the blaring wall of sirens. Fire engines and ambulances sped past the service station, their flashing lights painting the night in eerie streaks of red and blue. The commotion startled us, making the strange atmosphere even heavier. Not knowing what else to do, we went back into the service station to regroup and get a coffee. Another hour passed before we finally returned to the car. This time, when I got inside, my jaw nearly hit the floor. There, on the dashboard, directly above the steering wheel, were my keys. I froze, staring at them. My friends were equally stunned. Those keys had not been there before. We had torn the car apart looking for them, and now they were sitting in plain sight, as if someone had placed them there deliberately. Desperate to shake off the weirdness, we started the car and got back on the road. But as we approached the junction to leave the service station, we were stopped. The road ahead, the one we were supposed to take, was completely closed. Curious, I rolled down my window and asked a nearby worker what had happened. His answer made my stomach drop. "There's been a massive accident," he said, shaking his head. "Several cars involved. Fatalities." I sat there stunned. That was the road we would have been on. We might have been caught in the crash, maybe even killed, if we hadn't been delayed by the vanishing keys. The car was silent as we took the detour, each of us lost in our thoughts. Then, as if the universe had one more twist in store, the radio suddenly crackled to life. Ella Fitzgerald's Paper Moon began to play. My heart stopped. That was his song. My granddad's song. I pulled over to the side of the road, tears streaming down my face. My friends didn't understand why I was crying so much, but I didn't care. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you, Grandad." In that moment, I knew the lost keys weren't a coincidence, and neither was the song. My granddad had been watching over me, protecting me like he always had. He kept me and my friends safe. The rest of the trip went by uneventfully, but that eerie feeling I'd woken up with was gone and replaced by warmth and gratitude. When I returned home, I decided to honour my granddad's memory in the most fitting way. I got a small tattoo on my ankle with the words, "Paper Moon." To this day, whenever I hear that song, I smile and feel his presence, knowing he's still looking out for me. Thank you, Ruby. What a lovely story in a strange way, because the pile-up on the road wasn't obviously lovely, but the thing about your granddad being like a guardian angel, and obviously he hid them keys to save your life. You know, spirits are known to be able to see into the future, and he saved you and your friends. I mean, like you said, you know, you tore that car apart. There's no way them keys would have just vanished off the face of the earth and then just be placed back on the dashboard like that. I mean, I don't know. That sort of stuff just blows my mind. But it's actually, you know, it's quite a warming story to know that your loved one, you felt his presence and he was still there, you know. After passing, he was still there, and that's what we all want to feel at the end of the day, isn't it? We want to know our loved ones are still around us at all times. Do any of you listeners still believe in a guardian spirit after hearing that? Perhaps it's just coincidence, or maybe it's something much, much more. I mean, what do you think? We are at the end of episode 13, and thank you so much for listening in and giving me your support and coming on to the Terracella train as we go ploughing through the podcast world. Today, I just want to say I had a great chat with Emma from the Real Life Ghost Stories podcast. I was invited onto her show for an episode, which will be out very soon, so keep an eye. And it was great. She's such a lovely girl and really positive and, you know, wanting to help people. And it was just great because I've been a fan of her show for years. So, you know, I think that was the first show I ever listened to when I started searching for paranormal stuff. And yeah, it was just an honour to be on there. So anyway, on her Real Life Ghost Stories podcast, which I'm sure you know if you're on mine, the episode will be up next week, I believe, so keep an eye out. But anyway, I am going to go now and put the kettle on. But I just wanted to say thank you again, and I will see you for episode 14 of The Terracella. But As usual, don't have nightmares. Bye bye.